Uh, Mr. Tomaso, we'll move on to questions now, and I'd like to start with you. A common theme across all industries that we hear about in this committee is regulatory certainty and general confusion put forth in the form of government regulation. Can you talk a little bit about the regulatory process in your industry as well as the process on how some of these new fuels are categorized by the EPA?
Sure. The first thing, when we started in 2005, that was first when the biodiesel subsidy came out, where it was 50 cents for, it was a 50-cent per gallon production credit for biodiesel made from second-use oils and $1 for the virgin oils. And in any new industry, as it builds traction, you're building the customer on a one-off basis, and the way Mr. Taylor talked about building the trust with the farmers, we build the trust with our customers that this fuel is going to be here when we make the conversions to switch over from petroleum to biofuels. The uncertainty and the changes in the policy affect us because as we produce this fuel based on certain circumstances and certain economics, when they go away, we have to go away or either subsidize, basically fund those subsidies until or if they do come back. And that ends up causing a lot of disruption to our supply chain, supply flows. And we have a large logistics arm, 5 million gallons worth of storage, 60 tank cars that drive around the country on a daily basis. So when all of a sudden those subsidies go away and those customers are looking for product to be price competitive and the economics change overnight the way they have done since 2006 on and off, it does affect us very drastically.
How does the EPA categorize the fuels you produce?
Currently, we are classified as an advanced biofuel, a D5 RIN. Since the program's inception in July of 2010, the rules changed twice, and again reclassifying us twice and changing the value of our RIN. And again, this has also caused big disruption to our market.
So changing rules when the EPA does that,
no good.
That's hurting your ability to be able to grow the business.
Absolutely.
Need some certainty in there. I am curious as to the role that the Federal Government's research and development efforts have on your business. What is that community like in terms of the R&D, and does it work in partnership with small businesses?
We've had very little experience with state-run R&D or government-run R&D programs. We do a lot of all the R&D ourselves. We did employ Penn State to do private study for us, as well as we have chemical engineers that we employ that used to work in the petroleum industry that came on with a lot of industry secrets that helped us to make a better fuel.
How about you, Mr. Taylor? Are you using state, federal government R&D?
Yes, we are.
Okay. Mr. McAdams?
A lot of my members are.
Okay, great. Mr. Tomaso, I'm intrigued a little bit by the work that you're doing with these catfish hatcheries to be able to skim off the fat that is there. Where does an idea like that come from?
Oh, that was interesting. We had some sales guy that came out from Louisiana that had access to one pond. And he was very undercapitalized, didn't know the technology, and didn't have a market for the product, but had an inside track and saw it and went to the plant owner and told them about its possibility, but didn't have the means to extract it. And then when interest started to develop over this one pond, we were the only ones that had the ability to harvest it, process it, and actually find a market for it. So that's when we sent a team down there to develop that market and bid on all those other 12 ponds. And we did some experimenting. At first, we pulled loads off the ponds in a very crude manner, trucked them back to Pennsylvania, processed them down to Pennsylvania, and then sold them back to Texas into the Houston fuel market. And then from there, we developed the whole business development of going down there and going after all the 12 plants.
Yeah. Great example of American entrepreneurialism. You didn't have a bureaucrat out of Washington, D.C. come down and say, we've got a great idea. This actually came out from the working area. So
Yeah, there
appreciate
was a mechanical contracting company that went out of business a couple of days before we got down there, and they were 60 guys ready to start manning excavating equipment, trucks, welding. It was an excellent opportunity.
Terrific. Mr. Taylor, can you explain a little bit about the differences of creating biofuels for transportation and biofuels for electrical generation?
As far
there-
as biomass is concerned.
Right.
Excuse me, thank you. The difference, in at least the approach that we've taken is to produce the biomass is our sort of the first thing we had to do. And we're actually creating a number of paths with relationships, both towards cellulosic, which would take the crop in some form or fashion into their process, or densifying it into pellets, but more of almost a biomass, kind of a biorefinery. Some of it could be building products and other things, but those channels we see as we have a multiple of channels that we're putting in play to be able to maximize the value of the crop, which is the #1 thing as a farmer-owned cooperative we're trying to do. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, I think that gets to it. And I just kind of going back to the catfish, because we've heard of being able to take French fry oil and be able to operate a vehicle. Are you doing some experimenting with that? You'd mentioned using it for heating.
My partner, I originally come out of the restaurant business in New York City, where there's a large heating oil, industrial heating oil #4, #6 market.
Right.
My partner, Dave Dunham, started in the trucking industry. He actually started collecting used cooking oil and converting his father's tractor trailers to run on vegetable oil to lower the gas. In the long term, running raw vegetable oils in transportation is not a viable option. We developed the market to run large industrial applications, power plants, universities, as well as district heating plants to run on our fuels.
Mr. Chairman, if I could come back and kind of tie that question with your first question. I'm going to get in the weeds just a second, because I think it makes the point that both of these gentlemen are trying to make. So, for instance, if he tries to use a hardwood to make pellets or to make biopower, he has no problem. But if we go into the transportation fuels industry and we want to build a $500 million cellulosic plant and make a drop-in renewable jet fuel from wood, the definitions under the RFS are incredibly prescriptive. If Ralph wants to take his catfish oil, he has to have a determination from the EPA that specifically says it's a waste. Now, this is a problem. This is a term of art, waste. What is a waste? Well, waste is something that has no value. So as I try to certify fuels on behalf of my 43 different members, every single feedstock has to go under the RFS and be determined whether it's certified under the law, which means many of his feedstocks have had to be singly submitted for their greenhouse gas reductions, the only law in America that regulates greenhouse gases for each of the 4 categories. And if the EPA doesn't determine that his molecule is a pure hydrocarbon molecule, then he's not a D4 RIN, he's a D5 RIN, and the difference is $1. Now, that's a big difference. Yeah. So the devil is in the details here, and in defense of the EPA, the statute was prescriptive in some way when we originally wrote it in 2007, and that is because, candidly, the incumbent industry had been around longer and people understood it. I'm not criticizing the incumbent industry, but as we move forward, one of the challenges for our association and for all the guys sitting at this table is to have a level playing field so all these different molecules can come in and lower the cost for the American driving consumer, whether it's diesel, jet, or gasoline. And we still have impediments in the regulatory structure that we're working on today. And I'm hoping that we can get some of these rules through OMB, such as the heating oil rule that would expand the market for Ralph, or the commingling rule that would allow the Colorado butanol company to deploy its fuel, which you can't now. Those are the kinds of things I think that you're trying to drive at.
You bet. No, appreciate those comments. Mr. Taylor, in regards to some of the federal research and development efforts, are they being focused in the right areas?
The areas that we have participated in have been very specific. State of Missouri, through a small business, rural small business grants, was a study, for example, done on which energy crop would be the best for Missouri. We were the lead on that study. Miscanthus was the chosen crop, and we've had 2 studies since that point. So we've utilized 3 different studies sponsored by the State of Missouri Small Business Administration.
Okay. Great. Mr. McAdams, there seems to be a pretty rapid breakthrough in technology in a variety of different fields that are out there. You were just speaking to it a bit, but could you estimate where most of these innovations have come from? I think you spoke to it just a second ago.
Private sector?
It's all the private sector.
It is private sector. Now, I will say I was the keynote speaker at NREL this year. Very talented group. The government has a good facility and a consortium they built at the Department of Energy to try to help lower the cost of testing different enzymatic reactions, and that's been helpful. I think there are 38 members of the consortium. But a lot of this is privately financed. And a lot of these guys have been at it for 5 years. What I'm really proud to say is when the private sector focuses on innovation and they're trying to make a dollar at it, they do it real quickly and they do it economically efficient. And so that is why it's so important that a framework like the RFS or a tax code, if you choose to have one, is neutral. It lets a level playing field so we can raise the capital to actually fund the targeted R&D that each of these technologies need.
Going back to some of your previous comments, would you be recommending that Congress play a more vigorous role in terms of oversight of EPA, in terms of having common sense regulations that are coming into play?
I think it's always a good conversation that the executive agencies have with the U.S. Congress. Over my tenure in Washington, I've found that the dialogue actually helps focus the mind and that it brings an opportunity to really ask questions. Sometimes in the legislative process, we don't have the time to get into some of the weeds, and what we've done constitutionally is we delegated a lot of these specific decisions to the agencies. And I think it's really important that Congress have a very vigorous and active role in making sure that the statutes, their content and their intent is met. And I like that dialogue personally. So I would encourage you to do that, and I think there's a lot of opportunities to expedite the deployment of these technologies through that dialogue.
Great. You know, the renewable fuel standards has been set at 36 billion gallons of biofuels to be inserted into the transportation fuel pool by 2022. Is that a realistic goal?
I think that it was a very optimistic stretch target. And so what we see is the flexibility that was built into the statute. I commend the Congress for the flexibility they built in with the off-ramps. What you have in terms of specific application now of the statute is you saw, for instance, the cellulosic pool number was lowered over 90% in 2011. The pool was also lowered over 90% in 2012, and they're getting ready to make a recommendation in 2013. This has been an incredibly difficult economic market, and the economic market didn't match up with the stretch targets that were put in the statute. So I now have many members that are planning to bring to market. We're really beginning to see some of the cellulosic sector come in and try to meet these mandates. What EPA is allowed to do is to gift some of those gallons into the advanced pool. Big question on whether they could gift it into the biomass-based diesel pool. I agree with the National Biodiesel Board that moving forward, there's a great opportunity to raise the billion-gallon ceiling on the biomass-based diesel pool. We could probably do upwards of 2 billion gallons between now and 2022. And if that's backing out foreign oil, I think everybody from the executive branch to the legislative branch ought to look at that and what opportunities you have to kind of move some of these buckets around.
Right. Mr. Tomaso, Mr. Taylor, do you have any comments on that?
Yeah, I do, if I may, Mr. Chairman. I think there's another piece to it as far as some of the environment we've been in over the last few years. We've been oil refining since 1939. We know the commodity pretty well. This economic vacuum of the last 3 or 4 years was also accompanied by crude oil reaching a high in July of 2008 at $147 and hitting somewhere in the low 30s by the summer of 2009, gutted most, if not any, desire to be in renewables and risk your own money. This belief now, one of the reasons we're an 83-year-old organization, Our belief, and the reason we've entered it, is because we believe that generally global BTU prices have gone to another level in general, and consequently lowered the bar, so to speak, for renewables. Hence, we've entered it. It is, I think, paramount to let programs work. Now the environment is correct. As we come out of the sort of the economic vacuum we've been in, global prices are up and likely to stay. Gives now the right environment if time is lent. And that includes the BCAP programs for biomass, which we implemented very successfully. It is a very good program, and we believe our model is almost the poster child for success in that. It helped the farmer plant get over the hump while we made the investment in environmental assessments, equipment, processes, plants, all of those types of things. All of those things are now in play because of those two things, a recovering economy and a higher fuel global BTU price. Let the programs work now.
Great.
Yep, I concur.
Good. Okay. Mr. Hughes, didn't want to leave you out, but can you describe the new technology that is in frac tanks and elaborate on how these tanks can mitigate some of the fears and risks associated with fracking?
Yes, sir. I know for a fact that our facility, when we manufacture our tanks, we don't differentiate on quality. Some of the same gentlemen that are welding on military vehicles are also welding on these tanks. So we practice the utmost integrity when we're working on them. I think one of the bigger parts that needs to be understood is the oil and gas operators have implemented pretty much their own best practices, self-implemented them, and have gotten away from a lot of the in-ground impoundments and have moved over to hard-side portable tanks, which makes it a lot easier to manage the fluid through all courses of the operation.
Great. You know, as you may well be aware, in the West we have plentiful natural gas. We definitely need the jobs. As you note, we need to do it in a responsible way to be able to achieve that. With the pricing that we have, we've got a real challenge. Do you see a pathway to be able to make the production of natural gas literally more viable in this country?
Well, as you know, in our section, as Mr. Kritz knows, that the majority of the Marcellus sits over a dry gas, and we're moving more west towards where there's fluids that come up with the actual dry gas. Most of these operators need probably about 500 barrels of fluids that come up with their gas production per day in order to offset the very low prices that are in place right now for the dry gas. But as far as a path, I believe that we need to really focus on base loading our energy sector to be able to use that gas to generate electricity. And I know that's what a lot of the larger oil and gas companies, Exxon for one, is forecasting out to 2030, sorry, that the majority of increase for natural gas will come from electric generation.
Right. You know, you may not have seen it. It just came out in headlines this morning where EPA official apologizes for the call to crucify oil companies. Is that going to give some pause? Because it does need to be all of the above. We need all of these energy sources. Are we seeing an overreach again by the EPA?
I would say yes, sir.
Great. I concur. So I'd now like to yield to Mr. Kritz for his question.